live.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. This is a special recording, special event for the Progressive Candidate Summit. I'm joined with a very exciting candidate, Jamaal Bowman, who is the Democratic candidate in New York District 16. A bit of a rock star. He defeated a very establishment candidate, Elliot Engel, who conceded just recently. This is a race, many have compared it to AOC in her race, an establishment candidate. And both of these elections represent something that's happening in America and that's very significant. We are living at a time see a sense of something new, at least struggling to be born. And so more than anything, we need new voices. And Jamaal Bowman is an example of such as that. He's been an educator for 20 years. You know, one of the things that we always want to remember is that the founders called the House of Representatives the People's House. They thought it would be candle makers and farmers and blacksmiths. And this is exactly what they wanted it to be. They didn't want it to be just a bunch of entrenched political class. They wanted it to be from the people's house. Someone who has worked with kids, someone who has been an educator for 20 years, a school principal, founding a middle school. It's not an accident that Jamaal Bowman has excited so many people. I remember when I first saw his video, it was like, wow. It was like and the way he talked about his constituents and the way he talked about the country. This is an overthrow of an old kind of establishment mentality. You know, it's interesting. I live in Washington, D.C. now. There's some wonderful people here, but you do feel the box. You do feel that there's this box of the way people think. And I want to mention something about that before I introduce you to Jamal. You know, if you are living in London or you're living in Paris or you're living in Berlin, you're living in most of the certainly democratic capitals of the world. The cultural capital, the financial capital, the artistic capital is the same city as the political capital. And so the politicians are having dinner, the politicians are having lunch and breakfast and hanging out all the time with the people who are really down with what's going on in the culture. What happened with the United States was that our founders, and I think with good intention, moved the capital. They didn't want it to be in New York. They wanted it to be in Washington because for them, what the founding of this country represented was getting the government out of your face. Well, that has some good aspects to it, but it has created Washington as an industry town. And what's so important with the House of Representatives, even more than the White House, even more than the Senate, is people are coming in from all over, and people are coming in who represent the real American experience. That's what we have in Jamaal Bowman. It's a time for a new era of leadership, for a new era of conversation, not the same old, same old. To be honest, the same old is how we got here. And I think we'd all agree we're in trouble now. So don't be desperate, don't be afraid, don't be hopeless, because all the good stuff is happening, the new dawn is happening, and part of that new dawn is Jamaal Bowman. Jamaal, thank you so much for being here with us.
Of course, Marianne, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. A lot of people know about your race. Everybody was watching. Everybody is so excited to see that you won, and that basically, you know, given your district, you will be the new congressman from New York District 16.
But, God willing, God willing.
God willing. My mother would, that's exactly what my mother would say. That's right. I think that it's so important. So many people, I think a lot of the people who are listening tonight are kind of not so much new to politics as they've just been not watching, not that involved. And of course, now everybody in America knows nobody can afford to look away. I very much want to ask you your thoughts about what's going on in the country. But first, I want people to hear a little bit about your background and what your journey was to actually saying, I'm going to run for Congress. Particularly, you and I talked earlier, you had been very involved with trauma-informed education, the issue of trauma of the individual. How did that lead you to wanting to take on the trauma of a nation and so forth? So before we talk about where America is right now, I'd love to hear more about where you've been and how you got here.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure
Pleasure.
and real honor to be here. Thank you for running for president and
Yeah.
centering the well-being of all of us as part of your campaign. I was born and raised in New York City. I was raised by a single mom along with my three sisters. Went to public schools my entire life, lived around a lot of diversity, people from all over the world, lived in public housing and rent stabilized apartments. Grew up during the crack cocaine era and the AIDS epidemic. So it was a challenging time from that perspective. And crack really ravaged and destroyed many communities, particularly African American communities. And all of that led to me becoming a teacher in the first place. I started teaching in 1999 in the South Bronx. Did that for about 5 or 6 years before becoming a school counselor for 3 years at the High School for Arts and Technology. And for the last 10 and a half years, I've served as a middle school principal. And I've worked in what they call Title I schools. These are schools that have been neglected and under-resourced for quite some time. And they exist within communities of concentrated poverty. And what we were talking about earlier and what educators really understand is that concentrated poverty leads to toxic stress and chronic trauma. And when children and families are living with trauma on a day-to-day basis, you see the negative health, academic, and economic outcomes that we continue to see in Black and Brown communities disproportionately. And for me, the tipping point occurred during the 2017-2018 school year when 34 children died within the K-12 school system in the Bronx and 17 died via suicide. And my school is across the street from an area called Co-op City, where there are about 15,000 units and 55,000 residents. And there was a young girl, ninth grader, who was bullied in school and had no one to turn to. So she decided to go to the top of a building in Co-op City, a very tall building, about 30-something stories, and jump off the building. So that was the level of trauma we were dealing with right here in our community. And our elected officials were not paying any real urgent attention to the needs of the most vulnerable in our district. And it's not just our district, it's the entire country. So it was at that point that I started thinking about a run for Congress and really centering the well-being of children and families through a racial justice and economic justice lens. And it was a story that really excited the people in this district and ultimately led to us winning a primary election.
I'm very interested in everything that you've just said. And in my own campaign, one of the pillars of my campaign was the establishment of a Department of Children and Youth for the very reasons that you said. And I had the very meaningful experience of talking to so many people about the fact that there are millions of chronically traumatized children in the United States, as you say, from 13 million hungry children, hundreds of thousands of homeless children, and how many children who go to schools where they don't even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read, in the very kinds of schools that you were describing, where a child, if they haven't learned to read by the age of 8, has less of a chance of graduating from high school than incarceration later in life. And even now, and I want to ask you in a moment about the issue of the school reopenings and what your thoughts are about that. But when I was campaigning, Jamal, everywhere I went, I would meet parents and teachers who would talk about how they have actually established trauma rooms in their schools. And teachers who would say to me, I was educated to teach. I was not educated to deal with these children. So the community wraparound services, the trauma-informed education is so important. And of course, if we would front end our resources, I mean, I believe every public school in America should be a palace of culture and learning and the arts. The children who were born in the Bronx have the same God-given potential as the children who were born in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And we know now so much about the brain of a child and what goes on before the age of 5, before the age of 8. If you think about the kind of fundamental change that we have and that I hope you will stand for, not just incremental change, not just, oh, a little more money for SNAP, a little more money for Head Start. We need a fundamental change. If you look at what they have in the Health and Human Services, the one agency with a $58 billion budget with which to help children, as opposed to what, 760 billion for the military. So please know that so many of us are really hoping and expecting that when you get in there, you're going to take a stand legislatively for exactly the kinds of things that you just spoke about. Because and as a mother and as an American, I could not agree with you more. Let me ask you, before we go on to where America is now with the Trump administration, et cetera, I am curious specifically your opinion, your feelings about what's going on with the school reopenings, what you think about that. Let us know your thoughts.
Absolutely. I mean, you said so much there that's really important that I want to touch on briefly before we go to school reopening. What you said about reading levels at age 8 and the outcomes later on in high school is so critical, which is why we have a hyper focus on early childhood education,
Yes.
birth to age 8, and universal childcare. Because if we can provide nurturing spaces for our children and families, birth to age 8, children, one, are more ready to enter, ready to learn at 5 years old, and then by the age of 8, they're ready to accelerate within the school system so that they can graduate on time in the 12th grade. So that birth to age 8 period is so key. And what you said about trauma-informed schools, I just want to say quickly, in my school, we had 260 students. We didn't hire a dean of students. We didn't hire a assistant principal. We hired a social worker and we hired a school counselor, and we brought in visiting nurse services twice a week. And we also had a substance abuse counselor 4 days a week. So that's 4 counselors in a school of only 260. That's what helped us to become trauma informed. And right before I resigned, our formerly known as a SAVE room became a restorative justice room and a mindfulness room. And mindfulness was something that was a core part of our curriculum and something that children exercised and engaged in on a consistent basis. And that takes me to opening schools. So,
If
right.
I may, even before you do, I'd like to dig a little deeper with what you're talking about now, because this is the whole idea of a Department of Children and Youth. I'm so passionate about what you're talking about. Many of these children, as you know, but everybody needs to realize, many of these children are traumatized before 3.
Yes.
Many of these children are traumatized before preschool and before kindergarten. And also, when you're talking about trauma-informed education, we need a trauma-informed police department.
That's right.
Because and much of the trauma of many of these children is due to the fact that they themselves have interfaced. And I've heard policemen who are sad about it. I've heard policemen say, I had to take the father, but I'm watching what's happening to the kid who's in the room, and we don't have anything to do with those kids, and we didn't have any social worker to do a follow-up with the child or whatever. These things are so systemic. And that's why just the Department of Education is not enough. So what I would meet all over the country, Jamal, were social workers, early childhood experts, not just educators, but psychologists, neuropsychologists, people who really knew about the needs of these children. But as you said, so under-resourced. And even when I would talk to these amazing human rights activists who were doing this kind of work with the children, what I would get everywhere, I would often say, of the children who need your services, about what, because they would tell me these marvelous stories. And I would say, of the children who need your services, about how many do you think you're able to actually help? And everywhere I would go, Jamal, I would eerily get the same number. And that would be how many of them would say about 10%. Mm-hmm. And also, sometimes you see these stories on the news about somebody who escaped a difficult childhood in a difficult neighborhood in America. And I think we all need to ask ourselves, in the richest country in the world, why should childhood have to be anything that somebody needs to escape? So I'm with you. Go for it. Okay, now tell us what you think.
Absolutely, 100%. So in terms of opening schools, we are not ready, unfortunately, at this moment to open schools safely.
I so agree.
The reason why we are not is because of the incompetence of Donald Trump and the White House and the Republicans in Congress. We have not brought the full resources of the federal government to bear to even think about reopening schools. We did not enact the Defense Production Act in the way we should have, urgently and aggressively. We do not have the resources to hire more teachers, which is what we're going to need in order to lower class size. We are not talking about repurposing other learning spaces as classrooms to lower class size. We're not talking about outdoor learning and environmental education, which I think would be critical to implement in this moment in particular, as the virus is less likely to spread when you're outdoors. And it's something we need to implement more in our schools to begin with. We have schools in New York State, and I'm sure it's this way across the country, that where classrooms do not have windows and there's literally no ventilation at all. There's no way to reopen those schools without windows. So we need to make sure windows can open. We need to make sure we have PPE and ventilation. We need to make sure class sizes are lower. We need to hire more teachers, more social workers, more school counselors, more mental health professionals, and we need to implement outdoor learning and exemplary distance learning as well, because there's some learning that can happen with the technology that's effective. But we need to make sure every kid has a laptop and or iPad and has access to Wi-Fi. None of that is happening or being discussed right now in a comprehensive way, which is why I'm saying we are not ready yet. If the Republicans do what they're supposed to do in alignment with the HEROES Act and the states implement the resources effectively, then maybe we'll be ready to open. But right now we are not there yet.
I agree with you. So let me ask you, and by the way, talk about trauma. Think about the trauma of these parents. Think about the trauma of these children. Think about the trauma of these teachers. What can we do? I know many of us are saying what you have said. We're not ready to do this safely. The CDC had given proposed guidelines. The president said that they were too expensive and too impractical. Is there anything that we can do, Jamal? I mean, you'll be there. You'll take office in January. Mm-hmm. Is there anything we can do though to stop this insanity? Or is this is a decision that's being made on a state-by-state basis? Is that correct?
It's a state-by-state basis, and it's a school district by school district basis. What we've been doing and what needs to happen is we need to push the senators, the Republican senators across the country, to be much more bold and more aggressive and more urgent with their coronavirus bill in alignment with the HEROES Act. So the House passed the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act is very good. And if that were to be implemented, schools would be in much better shape. The Republicans in the Senate are coming back with a bill that is not as good. It's weak on so many levels, starting with unemployment insurance, which they're trying to take from $600 a week to $200 a week. And they're talking about conditioning aid to schools based on the reopening of schools full time. Schools are not ready to reopen full time. It's not safe for the kids. And if we put our kids in, if one child dies in this country, that means it's unacceptable and it was unsafe to open. That's how we should look at it. So we need to really lobby the Republicans in the Senate to be more urgent and aggressive with the resources and more in alignment with the HEROES Act. Right now, what I would encourage parents to do right now during the summer is to give your children as much playtime in a safe space with close friends and family as much as possible, because the social learning enhances brain development almost as much as the cognitive learning. So playtime right now is critical. Learning time in the home right now is also critical. And hopefully, we have to hope that school districts and states get themselves together around a learning infrastructure come the fall. But the key thing right now is to pressure Republican senators to make sure that the coronavirus bill is something that's robust.
I hope all of you will pick up the phone tomorrow. That would be 202-224-3121, right, Jamal? Yes. Call your senators, call your congresspeople, and tell them that you want, particularly the Republicans, right? You want yes. a much stronger coronavirus bill. You want a bill that helps the people, not just the corporations. You do not want that $600 unemployment reduced to $200, and you do not want those schools to be opened until they're safe. And something that Jamal said that is so important, what they're doing now is that they are tying the funding for these school districts to their opening. So you might have a school district that doesn't feel that it's prepared safety-wise, but if they don't open the way the president has asked, then they will not receive funding. That's accurate to say it that way, right, Jamal?
Correct. Yes.
And of course, as Jamal was saying, the Democrats have passed the HEROES Act, and it's a good bill, and that's the kind of thing that we'd like to see in the Senate as well. Is right? Did I get that?
Absolutely. Yes.
And just hearing you speak is not only inspiring, but very exciting, because you're going to actually be there saying all the things that you're saying now.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about what's happening.
Yeah.
I think you agree that we're in a very, very difficult moment in American history, to say the least. I think one of the darkest chapters ever. I have great faith in this country. I have great faith in the American people. I have great faith in the principles on which we stand. I feel in my heart that long term we're going to be fine, but short term and medium term I'm deeply concerned. And one of the reasons I'm excited about yourself, about you being there, is because you are a new kind of leader who is going to stand up to what's happening. So I want to hear your thoughts. I think we all do. What do we need to do before November? And what are the things that you feel we need to know about? Black Lives Matter, the president, what he's doing, what's going on, what's happening in Portland, these troops, Chad Wolf, William Barr, anything you want to talk about, it's happening right now. We can't even wait till, once you get there in January. Would love to hear your thoughts about what's happening now and what we as citizens need to know.
Yeah, so first I just want to say I feel incredibly fortunate to be in this position at this moment. As you mentioned, this is a crucible moment in American history to deal with the coronavirus pandemic, a global pandemic, and Black Lives Matter movements across the country. Everyone is paying attention. Everyone is leaning in. And I feel fortunate, but I'm also excited, not just for myself, but for the fact that the protesters are relentless in applying pressure to elected officials at the city, state, and federal level to make transformative change in our country. You know, the Justice and Policing Act, introduced by the Congressional Black Caucus and passed by the House, is bold legislation. It takes us in a very positive direction, needs to be strengthened, and the CBC and the House is working with activists and organizers to make sure that is strengthening. We repealed 50A here in New York State to make sure police transparency increases dramatically. That's huge. And there was a fight at the city council level here in New York City to defund the police to the tune of $1 billion. That ended up being 500 million, with the other 500 million reallocated in a numbers game. But the point is, different conversations and different policies are being brought to bear because of the movements happening at the city, state, and national level. So that's a good thing. And I feel very fortunate as a Democratic congressional elect here in New York 16 to be a part of this movement. And I just want to say, this movement now feels different than it felt in 2012 when Black Lives Matter initially exploded. You know, during that time, it was huge and warranted and necessary, but there was an All Lives Matter pushback, and there was a Blue Lives Matter pushback. And what we were saying then and what we're reiterating now is all lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. And what I'm hearing and seeing across the country from white allies, white co-conspirators, young people, older people, rich and poor, I see diverse coalitions coming together to push back against an oppressive system of white supremacy. We didn't see that in 2012. And even John Lewis, God rest his soul, mentioned he didn't see this level of diversity and pushback during the civil rights movement. So this is a tremendous opportunity that we have to continue to lean into and take advantage of. And I'm getting calls from superintendents in school districts, students, other elected officials who want to learn more and want to do more. So that's a powerful, powerful thing. But this is something, you know, democracy is a contact sport. And one of the reasons why the wealthy elite have been able to take over our political system is because we all haven't been engaged in the contact sport as much as we have needed to be. myself included. And the reason why I wasn't engaged is because as a black man in this country, I didn't think this country gave a shit about me. So I didn't care about it in terms of how that system worked. And it took learning and growing and understanding and realizing, well, that's where the power is. And that's where the power of the people resides. So it's our job to get more involved and then engage the entire populace to be a part of our democratic system. So I say that to say that we have to continue to engage in our democracy. Even if we beat Trump and flip the Senate, we have to hold Biden and ourselves accountable toward creating a country that works for everyone. Right now, it doesn't. We have a system where over 150,000 have died because of the coronavirus, and Jeff Bezos made $13 billion in one day last week. The millionaire class has grown, the billionaire class has grown, and people are struggling to pay their rents and their mortgage and put food on the table. Our democracy is dead with this level of inequality, and it takes mass movements like the one we have right now to hold elected officials accountable towards passing the policies that will transform this country, focused on wealth inequality, racial equality, and just bringing the country together to make it work for everyone. So that's what we have to do. That's our charge. That's our mission collectively.
I certainly agree 100% with everything that you said. I want to know a few specifics. First of all, what should we do about these evictions? Secondly, what do you see as the main elements in dealing with wealth inequality and making our economy more just?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of evictions, we've called for an eviction blockade and an eviction moratorium. No one should be evicted from their homes because they are unable to pay rent because they don't have jobs. This is not like people have the money and refusing. They literally do not have the money. So we called for the cancellation of rent, the cancellation of mom and pop mortgages, and a blockade on evictions, in addition to $2,000 per month to everyone who lost their job until we deal with this coronavirus. That's what we've called for. What people are doing is they're organizing rent strikes, and rightly so, because they don't have the money to pay their rent. So what the hell are they supposed to do? And again, we have a system where the millionaire, billionaire class has grown while people are in danger, tens of thousands of people right here in New York State in danger of losing their homes. That's completely insane. Remind me of the second question. What was the second?
First of all, I just want to say before I get to that, it brings me great joy to think of you talking the way you're talking here right now in the well of the House. I'm going to be enjoying C-SPAN. So the second thing, and of course I agree with you. The second thing is, what do you see as the primary elements of the ending of this horrifying wealth inequality that has 1% of the population controlling more than 90% of the wealth?
So a few things. Number one, we need to make sure corporations like Amazon pay federal taxes. There are hundreds of corporations like Amazon that do not pay any federal tax. Number one.
We break up those tech companies?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Number two, we need to tax capital gains at Wall Street, tax transactions, so we could generate the wealth we need to, again, reinvest in public goods like education, healthcare, environment, etc. Number three, we need to make sure the wealthy overall just pay their fair share, not just on inheritance, but in terms of income, right? Right now, many of them are saving without paying any at all. The fourth thing I would say, I would point to reparations. And here's what I mean when I say that. Reparations, particularly for the African-American community, who are the descendants of slaves, we are owed our reparations, number one. But number two, reparations for everyone in terms of leveling the playing field, in terms of wealth and equality. We need massive federal investments. And the United States is a wealth generator, and we need to generate and invest that wealth in communities that have been historically neglected. That includes minority and women-owned businesses. That includes education, healthcare, environment, housing, etc. All of that is a part of the equation, and we need to also see housing as a human right, education as a human right, healthcare as a human right, so people aren't going into debt because they cannot afford housing or healthcare or education. So there's a lot to do, but we can do it all because we're the wealthiest nation on earth, and we need to get started.
And we've also seen historically that these kinds of things work. I mean, if you look at Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty, it was after his war on poverty that they started with the block grant, so that they were able to give that money in ways that the more right-wing elements would use them, that in fact did not assuage and ameliorate poverty the way we thought. And also with what you were talking about at the beginning this evening, large groups of desperate people are a petri dish. They are petri dishes out of which arise inevitable societal dysfunction. And that's why we should see, I think, large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. I remember one of the things I'm fascinated by, you probably know Dennis Kucinich had proposed a Department of Peace, and Barbara Lee now has, and others talk about a Department of Peace building, and the factors that actually contribute to a higher functioning, higher abundance, higher economy, and greater peace when economic opportunities for women are expanded, educational opportunities for children, violence against women is ameliorated, and a general reduction of human despair, that kind of humanitarian commitment, as opposed to short-term profit for corporations being this bottom line. We need to smash all that. And I don't think we need to smash it incrementally. We need to come in and fundamentally say, we have so strayed from the democratic ideal. We have so strayed from any kind of governmental or corporate ethical consideration for planet or for people or for animals. Louis Brandeis, the late Supreme Court Justice, said you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. And for all of those of you who are watching, it's just so exciting when you look at the arc of American history, because we do sometimes stray. We've certainly strayed before. We've strayed into areas of serious evil, and from the beginning, whether it was institutionalized suppression of women, whether it was in the enslavement of people, whether it was segregation, whether it was genocide of Native Americans. But we have tended over time to course correct. We answered slavery with abolition. We answered institutionalized oppression of women with the women's suffragette movement. We answered segregation with the civil rights movement. And we're seeing it now. And when you look at people like Jamaal Bowman, he's an example. So at the same time, we're reiterating the same cycle of violence. On one hand, we are a country based on some of the most aspirational and enlightened principles that have ever formed the core of a nation. And we have in every generation, and this was true at the beginning, and unfortunately it's true today, have included forces which would actually violently transgress against the principles on which we stand. But there's this thing in America. We answer, we come back, we push back. And that is exactly what you, Jamal, represent. So it's very exciting. A couple of people that want to come on, Jamal, and ask you questions. Is that okay?
Of course, absolutely.
Okay. The first one is a woman named Claire Cecil. So if we can bring up Claire Cecil, and Claire, you can ask Jamal whatever question you want to ask. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're excited that you're here. Ask whatever you want to ask.
Sure. So Jamal, you just won the big primary. Congratulations. But now that the primary is over, I wanted to ask, you've been doing a lot of fundraising, and what is that fundraising going towards now?
That's a great question. So we were able to do something spectacular during our primary. We tripled voter turnout. We tripled turnout amongst young people, and we tripled turnout amongst people of color. So we literally built a movement to help us win this election. We have to continue to build that movement. And in order for us to continue to build that movement, we have to organize people. And in order to organize people, we have to hire people. We have to hire people to help the community remain organized around the issues that matter most. So that's one reason why we're still fundraising. In addition, this is a year of the census. So we need every single person in our district to complete the census. That's another layer of organizing. If we get 90% completion, 80% completion, 100% completion, we're able to bring tens of millions of dollars in resources to our district. So we need to make sure we continue to hit the phones, knock on doors, pass out flyers, and do everything we can to make sure that people complete the census. We also have a general election coming up, which we're still fundraising for that. We're also supporting, just like Marianne, we're supporting other progressive candidates across the country. So this is a movement, not just in this district, a progressive movement here, but it's a progressive movement across the country. And we want to help and support as many candidates as possible. And fundraising is a huge part of that. And the last thing I want to say is, when I get to Washington in January, I want to focus on legislating and meeting the needs of my district and not on fundraising. So the more we can do that between now and January, the better prepared we are when we get to Washington in January.
Yeah, because we know that you'll do great, and the Republicans will have their eye on you. So we want to make sure that you go in not nervous about that for later. I also want to say, and I know some people are watching this on the Progressive Candidate Summit page and are seeing the endorsements that we have suggested. Later, everybody, I'm going to be telling you about the interview we're going to do Sunday night with Adam Christensen in Florida. But I want to give you this opportunity, Jamal. Any particular candidates you feel like mentioning?
Yeah, for sure. So there's Cori Bush out in Missouri. I believe she's in Missouri 1. There's Ilhan Omar out in Minnesota. She's in Minnesota 5.
She doesn't have, hold on a second, she doesn't have a real problem, does she? I mean, we don't have to worry.
Listen, we don't take anything for granted. So we're mentioning Ilhan. And then there's, I'm having a brain freeze here. Claire, who's my boy out in Massachusetts?
Alex Morse.
Alex Morse. Massachusetts 1, I believe. Alex Morse. So those are 3 that come to mind right away. Cori, Johan, and Alex.
Okay, Claire, if you want to put those in the chat room so people can look them up, I think they'd really be interested in that.
Absolutely. But real quick, this is my night, so I want to say BowmanForCongress.com.
Yes, for sure. We forgot about that part.
Click on the donate button and support us as much as possible.
Right. This is nice. BowmanForCongress.com. Do you have any other questions, Claire?
No questions. I just want to say thank you for having me, Jamal. I'm so excited to have you as my representative in my hometown. Thank you so much, guys. I'm so excited.
Thank you, Claire. Jamal, we have another young woman who'd like to talk to you. Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay, her name is Becca Rose. Becca, come on and be with us. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Ask away.
Sure. So my question for Jamal, you talked about some of the really unique programs that you had at CASA at your school. And I wanted to ask, what is something you taught or practiced at your school that you would like to bring to a national level?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So at our school, we believed in educating the whole child. So what that means is we focused on the child's cognitive, social, emotional, psychological, and creative development. So in doing so, we weren't a hyper test prep, high stress environment. It wasn't about that. It was about project-based learning. It was about collaboration. It was about creativity, and it was about curiosity and exploration. A big part of that was a course that we had called Advisory, where we focused on mindfulness and meditation. Now, I have to say, 10 years ago, when I introduced this in my Bronx middle school, I literally got in trouble for it and was investigated by the Department of Education. And I had to go to the chancellor's office to be interviewed by detectives because they thought I was practicing religion in public schools. Fast forward 10 years later, now it's something that everyone wants to implement in their public schools as part of restorative justice practices. But this was something that we practiced as a school. Mindfulness was key to help with centering, impulse control, relationship building, community building, and behavior management. So that's something that we should explore in schools throughout the country. I even looked at something today, and I knew about this before. I never brought it to CASA, but I think they're referred to as therapy dogs. So there are some schools that have therapy dogs and healing dogs as part of their curriculum. That's something that I wish I had brought to CASA. We never did, but it's something our schools are going to need now more than ever because of the trauma involved with this pandemic.
Not to even mention, if you really want to reduce the stress of these children, how about standing up to the NRA?
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Gun control legislation for sure. Absolutely.
You know, I would say to people when I was campaigning, I would say, think about where you work. And I would say, somebody raise your hand and tell me where you work. And somebody would say, I work in a coffee shop. And I said, all right, now think about this. Think about whether or not there was an established pattern of mass shootings at coffee shops. I said, wouldn't that psychologically and emotionally affect you every day that you went into work? The person would go, yeah. And I'd say, now imagine if you were 14 years old.
That's right.
First of all, I think withholding a world-class education from any child is a passive form of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about everything from the fact that we're not standing up to the NRA, to the fact that we are even talking about the catastrophic risk of these school reopenings when we don't know yet that it's safe to do, it feels to me like we as a nation perpetrate collective child abuse.
Yeah, so I want to jump. Thank you for bringing this up, because there's no history of school shootings in New York. Knock on wood, God forbid it never happens. But as a middle school principal, it's something that was always in the back of my mind because of what happened in Columbine, Virginia Tech, Florida, and the babies in the Connecticut school. The name is escaping me right now.
Sandy Hook.
And Sandy Hook, right? Sandy Hook Elementary. And I like, as a middle school principal doing lunch duty, like I would literally consciously think about where to position myself in the lunchroom just in case someone came in and just started shooting. Like, that's something that was always in the back of my head as a principal. And I swear after Sandy Hook, we were gonna like stop and pause and take a breather and reflect as a school on what the hell we're doing as a nation. And we didn't do that. You know, we just, the next day everybody went back to work and it was business as usual. So I'm happy you brought up the NRA piece and gun control piece, because that, along with mental health, the gun control piece is a huge issue we need to center in the conversation.
Health insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies, chemical companies, the NRA, oil and gas, food companies, or defense contractors, you're going to be in there, and you're going to have to deal with the pressure of the undue influence of this corporate aristocracy on our legislators. And that's why we need you there and people like you there. And of course, when you are in Washington, you won't just be representing your district, even though you're from New York, where, as you said, thank God, there have not been school shootings. You will be there representing the whole country as a member of that body. And I know I'm thrilled by it. Anything else, Becca, that you want to ask Jamal? Oh, honey.
You're on.
Okay.
You're good now. You're good now.
Classic. I will just say that I think a lot of young people are better off for having Jamal's influence in their lives during really formative years. And I am really excited to see that same influence in Congress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jamal, there are so many things I'd like to ask you. I know I can't keep you here forever, but I do want to ask you, what are we going to do about this president? What are we going to do about the fact that he is doing something that doesn't, you know, it shocks everybody, but doesn't surprise many of us anymore. This morning, he actually floated the idea of delaying the election. Any thoughts you want to share about this?
Well, I just want to say thank God for the courts, for organizers, for principled Republicans, principled members of the Republican Party, for the Democrats who are pushing back against him. Like, thank God for those who are fighting against him tooth and nail every day. Because when he says something or does something that's illegal, unconstitutional, or just plain racist, fascist, or dumb, he's called out for it and he's held accountable for it. So we have to continue to do that, and then do everything in our power to organize people across the country to make sure he loses the election in November. Like, that's the biggest thing. Let's vote him out, and let's push forward and get on with our lives in building a country that works for everyone. And with that, let's flip the Senate. So that's key as well. If we can win the White House, flip the Senate, now we can push. Now we have the opportunity to push bold, progressive policy. And I just encourage people to come together in healing and well-being and support for one another while we deal with the trauma that is President number 45, because his leadership theory is chaos. He governs through chaos, and that chaos is traumatic for all of us. So come together to support one another, but also do everything in your power to make sure he does not win in November so that we can move on.
I know that everybody's watching tonight is looking for hope and looking for encouragement and also looking for instruction. So I want to be very specific. So we want everybody to work hard on their congressional race, because everybody has one. Work hard on your senatorial race if you have one. And also it's important, when you know about great candidates, wherever they are, you can phone bank for people, even if they're not in your district, even if they're not in your state. Tell us, I want to be really kind of raw here. I know I'm a progressive Democrat. I know you're a progressive Democrat. I stand for Medicare for all, as you do, Green New Deal, et cetera. Many people, Jamal, are very discouraged that in the Democratic platform, the DNC, they wouldn't even put in legalizing marijuana. They wouldn't even put in Medicare for all, even though the majority of Democrats support it, et cetera. You and I both feel we gotta vote for Biden. We have to vote for the Democrat, and then the day after, work hard at pushing the administration in a progressive direction.
That's right.
I want to give you this opportunity to talk to people. I don't believe any American should be scolded. I think many people who supported candidates like Bernie, I think there are a lot of people who don't even recognize how many people who supported Bernie and myself and others really felt this was their only chance to get health insurance. It was their only chance to get out from under the burden of their college loan. It was their only chance to have a shot at the American dream. And they feel that they played by the rules, and they feel that the system is rigged.
Mm-hmm.
Take this opportunity and tell people why you believe or why you hope they will vote for Biden, if in fact that is your belief, which I assume it is. This is your chance to talk to some people who I assure you love you, but aren't so sure they're going to vote for Biden in November.
Yeah, the first thing I would say is I understand the lack of faith and the lack of hope and the level of despair when you look at where this country is, where it has been, and where it might be going. I encourage everyone to think about where the country might be going under another 4 years of President Trump versus 4 years of Joe Biden. Joe Biden, who has shown a willingness at the very least to collaborate with supporters of Bernie Sanders, the Bernie Biden alliance, that came up with a much more progressive environmental policy than Biden had before that collaboration. Yeah. And another thing I would point to is his focus on universal childcare, which goes back to how we started this conversation around birth to age 3 and what's essential there. I also want to point to the squad and look at what the squad has been able to do in Congress since 2018. I mean, every conversation we're having politically now starts with a Green New Deal and Medicare for all. That's because of Bernie Sanders, that's because of the squad, and that's because of other Democrats moving in that direction. Now that's a centerpiece of the conversation. And no one thought Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez would have a shot against Joe Crowley, and she beat him. And she went into Congress, and she's raising hell, and she's creating a paradigm shift in our country. And if she didn't do that, and if I didn't have the other squad members as role models for me, I probably wouldn't have run for office, because they're speaking truth to power and breaking through a glass ceiling of white male supremacy as for women of color, which is tremendous. So they created a pathway for someone like me. And then the last thing I would say is the fact that someone like me with my background can win an election against a 31-year incumbent who's the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, who grew up in this district, and we won by 16 points, and we won every part of the district, including, well, 95% of the district, it's 95% of the parts, including areas where he felt he had an advantage. That represents the change, not just in this district, but across the country. So be inspired by all of that, and be inspired by every single day in this country. There are peaceful protests pushing back against an oppressive system that has been racist and classist and sexist since the inception of America. And then lastly, we have to come together to support those in our communities, in our families who have lost a job, who are being threatened of losing their home, who do not have food security, who are struggling with their children. We have to come together to support them. And we don't need Donald Trump's permission or anyone's permission to help our neighbor. So we're going to organize to get him out of office. We're going to organize to flip the Senate. We're going to work and do whatever we can to help our neighbor. And we're going to be inspired by the Bernie Sanders of the world, the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, the squads of the world, the Jamal Bowmans of the world, the Marianne Williamsons of the world, and the John Lewises of the world, right? And if we were to ask, what would John Lewis demand of us in this moment? You know, this is a man who arrested over 40 times, beaten, skull cracked, concussed, spent his whole life and gave his life for all of us. So now it's our responsibility to take the baton and take the torch and do something great, not just for ourselves, but for each other. So I look forward to taking that journey with all of you.
So if you came on the program this evening looking to be inspired and looking to be encouraged, I can't imagine that you didn't receive from Jamal exactly what you were looking for. When John Lewis was laid to rest today, everybody knew it's time for this generation to take it from here. He has earned his rest. It's time for him to rest in peace and for the rest of us to rise up in power. If Donald Trump is president again, it's going to be very difficult for the likes of Jamaal Bowman to really have the kind of influence that we want. But if Donald Trump does not win again, it will be a whole new day, and there will be Jamaal Bowman in the United States House of Representatives. And there will be so many people who think in the ways that so many of us think, millions and millions and millions of Americans that do want a real break with some aspects of the past that have been a real break from democracy. We want to get back on the high road of everything that this country is meant to be. I know my heart is full, Jamal. It has been for a long time watching you, hoping that you were going to win, supporting you in whatever way I could. I'm so glad, like everybody watching, so glad you're going to be there. It's going to be exciting watching you. It's going to be, I have no doubt that you will be making all of the efforts that we want you to make. And I pray that the way will be paved, the path will be made clear for you to have the maximal effect and influence, not only on all of the adults in America, but on every child who will look at you and go, if he can do that, maybe someday I can. God bless you. I hope all of you will go to bowmanforcongress.com, support him now and support him later. We are going to change America. Thanks so much. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.